Hello everyone, welcome back to the NISA Edtalks series 6 segment. Today we have Mr. Bhanu Potta on board with us, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with Mr. Bhanu and the tremendous work Worldreader does for the readers around the world. I'm going to just take a little bit moment to talk about our speaker right now. Mr. Bhanu is passionate about building purposeful digital products and organizations that enhance human potential. As the Chief Growth Officer of Global South at Worldreader, Mr. Bhanu leads the build-up of organizational capacity and growth of impact and development across APAC, Africa, and later geosystems. During his product leadership roles with Worldreader, Yara International, Microsoft, and Nokia, he led some of the pioneering mobile-first tech products in education, health, agriculture, and livelihood sectors, which collectively benefited over more than 300 million beneficiaries globally. And now it brings us to Worldreader, what Worldreader really is. From bringing ebooks to a single school in Ghana in 2010 to reaching over 20 million readers in over 100 countries, Worldreader has transformed the way we read in over 12 years. In 2013, Worldreader was launched for mobile phones, making it possible for anyone, anywhere with a data-connected phones to access thousands of digital books. And today, Worldreader is working globally with partners to support vulnerable and undeserved communities with digital reading solutions that help improve reading outcomes, workforce readiness, and gender equity. And this is what we're going to talk about today in our topic on such values and on such ideas of the significance of digital literacy and inclusion among school communities. So when we talk about digital literacy and inclusion, so we just come to this understanding that technology has exponentially become a part of our lives, and this discussion is more relevant than ever, more specifically because we have in-depth challenges with regards to reaching out to people so as to aware them digitally and include them in this thoughtful dialogue of promoting digital inclusion through the medium of digital literacy, of course. So sir, this brings us to the first question for you. And we'd like to know, how do you define being digitally literate and digitally included in a world where mostly everything is done on screens these days?
Firstly, thank you, Nandita, for having me on the NISA Edtalks. It's a pleasure to be on this platform with you all. And to your question, what is digital literacy? And I think the best way I would like to explain that is to take a common daily street life example, right? Let's take an example of a small, tea stall, which is in the corner of the street. And you see those all the way from villages to towns to cities in India, right? And one other thing we have seen in the last 3-4 years, which happened, is that a lot of those tea stalls are now very actively accepting digital payment through the QR code, which sits on the top of the stall or on one of the bottle, and you just scan, pay for your tea or pay for your biscuits and move on, right? So let's take that scenario and talk about different levels of what digital literacy could be at a broad level, right? So the first level of digital literacy is just being aware that a particular transaction which an individual is doing can shift from a non-digital to a digital mechanism, right? So just the awareness is a part, that is the level 1 of digital literacy, right? So a pawn shop person, first even being aware that, oh, I can take payments through, Paytm or Google Pay or whatever QR code mechanism, just that awareness is level 1, right? That awareness then translates into onboarding and using. And that step could be either self-initiated by that person, or somebody else can come to that person and onboard that person. And that person then moves from awareness to usage stage, where he starts to ask his customers that you can pay on this QR code, right? Here, if you see, the digital is being used, but it's a little bit of a passive usage. Right? The person is saying, here is something, you scan and do what you want. And I know that I get the money, but I don't know how it happens and all that stuff, right? So that's usage level, right? From there, the next level would be understanding. understanding means that this shop owner needs to understand that whenever the money goes, whenever somebody pays, I get that money in my bank account or whatever account is attached to it. And the moment that happens, I need to know how to take the money out and use it for other things. Wherein the transaction of asking somebody to pay in a passive usage mode turns to I as a shopkeeper paying using digital money to other suppliers of mine, right? So from a passive usage level to an active usage level, right? And in understanding also is the fact that now that the money is coming into my bank account, this is all trackable, transactable, and I need to be aware of keeping a track of whether I'm coming into the taxable bracket or not. And if I am, then I need to being aware of all those other things. This is the active usage and understanding level. Then comes the next level, which is create, right? Which is a higher level of digital literacy, where I as a shopkeeper might create a WhatsApp group of my regular customers. And then if a new product is available, I actually send out a WhatsApp message or something like that saying, oh, we have started putting this new soft drink, next time you could try, right? And kind of using mechanisms to reach out. So I would say awareness, passive usage, active usage, plus understanding, and then a creator state. So these, I think, are the broad levels of what you can categorize digital literacy into. And I use this very simple example because we see it in our daily lives, and that kind of similar example applies for schools, teachers, doctors, hospitals, any sector you take.
Yes, so definitely. I think that was very rightly put, and it's a very simple example. I'm sure our viewers will understand this example because it's a whole cycle. The whole conversation takes place actively, and then from passively to being active. Yes, sir. So as you said, sir, that that's how it takes place within the school community also. I'd like to ask you, prior to the advent of COVID-19 and online classrooms, smart learning was not an alien concept for for most of us actually. And we saw some studies pouring in from the foundations like Azim Premji or even Central Skirt Foundation. And even NISA came out with its own learning loss report. And it showed that there is huge academic aggression with regards to mathematics and reading challenges, basically. It also showed us that this concept of smart learning is actually a concept for most of the students than a reality. So I just we'd like to know in what ways can our edtech industry help with this gap and accelerate digital inclusion for the school community?
Fantastic question. And I think it opens multiple dimensions. It's a broad question and opens multiple dimensions, but let me just put some brackets here in terms of what I would like to respond to. Firstly, when you say smart learning, I imagine you mean digital learning.
Exactly.
So if we stay in that realms, one of the things we need to understand is, firstly, we should not look at ourselves as a tech sector. I fundamentally believe we should look at ourselves as education sector, which is tech enabled, right? And that is a big difference. And how are we leading the intervention? Are we leading the intervention with technology, or are we leading the intervention with the pedagogy? Right? Technology can be a part of pedagogy, right? So I think one fundamental thing which happened when COVID came is there was a lot of digitization of offline experiences, assuming that if you record your teaching class and send it to your children, they could just see your class on a phone and learn, right? So I think there was a false notion of you can teach on the phone screen in the same way you can teach in the classroom, which is really not true, right? One of the big things which the entire sector missed in the COVID onslaught is thinking about technopedagogy. How do I teach differently when I'm teaching through a screen versus when I'm teaching in a classroom, right? Not only teaching, how do I assess differently as well, right? How do I test differently, right? on one side. On the other side, the ability of the child or the learner, this problem cuts across even a pre-primary child all the way to the university, particularly when COVID hit, is what is the learning process as a digital learner, right? Nobody has told anybody what that even means, like to be a digital learner, right? Yes. So I think there are these few steps which we had to, I think either we forgot or we didn't have enough time to figure those answers out before we actually techified, digified a ton of things and threw it out into the Ethernet and internet and expected things to happen, right? Yes. What we see now is basically a result of missing those 2-3 critical steps, right? So as an edtech sector, I think fundamentally we have to create an education service, not a technology service. We have to create a education service or a pedagogic based services which uses technology elements to make things easier, faster, scalable, or trackable, right? I think that fundamental premise is important on the edtech side, be it startups, be it NGOs which are trying to do edtech, all of them. Again, fundamentally, everybody is doing what they're doing with good intentions, but I think some of these things need fundamental thinking shift, which I think because of the urgency of COVID, we didn't have time to do all of that stuff, right? It's a good opportunity now that COVID is back, and obviously we might exist in a hybrid future kind of a situation to go back to these problems and try and start answering them, right? Now, when on the other side of the ball or the coin are schools or institutions which are taking these things and embedding into their system, right? Now, there needs to be a little bit of capacity building or decision-making building, which helps school owners or institutional owners to be able to assess which solution is education and learning solutions which is powered by technology versus which one is just a technology push, right? So the ability to differentiate on the buying side is also required, right? Now, this obviously is not going to be solved in a short period of time. Anything when new sectors and new subsectors are getting set up, it is a 5 to 10 year cycle always, right? Yes. I would say edtech was in the nascent 1.5 year stage when COVID hit, right? And that building that muscle power, building that inner core strength, when that phase was happening, this chaos came in, and thereby the scale grew, but the strength did not grow on the scale, right? So that is the problem we are grappling with. But the beauty of what COVID did is that it gave a lot of people on the tech side, schools and institution side, and even in the parent and learner community side, that a new way of learning is possible, and a lot of them have tasted it, right? Now it is for all of us to go back and refine them and make them education services which are tech enabled, and lean them more towards the pedagogy and learning outcomes, as opposed to just distributing tech and pushing digital stuff.
Yes, I think that was the most essential point you just made, that we were still developing with regards to edtech sectors, and COVID struck, then there was no readiness also and no time to think, which you just mentioned, fundamental thinking shift did not happen as such. And this is also why maybe, we sort of made errors and sometimes we did not. But I think, I think it's a very important to learn that now that we are back to such situations, we might get back to such situations, you never know. I think we do need to think about the technopedagogy, which you mentioned. It's very important. So yeah, I think that's what we should actually insist the whole school community to think about. So when we talked about technopedagogy and creating pedagogy-based services, you mentioned, and you also said that you'd not like to call it edtech, but education with the enabled technology. That's what you mentioned. I want to ask, we do have challenges ahead when we have to achieve these goals. So what kind of challenges await us as educators and students in this global community which is striving for digital inclusion and reduction in this digital divide?
Yeah. So let me answer the question in slightly reverse order. Let me first talk about digital inclusion and digital divide first, and then come to students and educators, right? Firstly, I think, are there problems with digital inclusion and digital divide? Yes, there are. There's no two ways about it. We as a species are journeying to the next level, right? Go back in history and look at the situation where books just came into being, right? The exact cycle is repeating now with digital in the form of screen. That's what is happening really, if you look at, right? Now, will there be inclusion issues and divide issues in the early stage of any new thing coming? Yes, when books were coming, books were so premium that a ton of people never had access to or ability to buy books. That situation will prevail, and then slowly things will become more mainstream, more commoditized, and all that stuff, right? So there's a natural curve which is happening, and that's the reality of it. There's no switch on, switch off to change it, right? However, when you look at markets like India, we are in a far better situation than a lot of other countries. And I'll just state some examples. One, India has the lowest cost device footprint available, in the sense that if you go down all the way, there's an 1100 rupee Jio phone on 4G. Nowhere in the world such a thing exists, right? So that is one thing which goes in favor of filling these gaps. Number two, we have, I think, even as of now, one of the lowest cost of digital internet or mobile internet in the world, right? Anybody can easily get a 2 GB per day at almost like nothing in terms of cost. Like a 2 GB per day is as affordable as a cup of tea on the street corner stop, right? So from an affordability point, I think the telecom sector has done, with all the chaos they had to go through, they've kept in mind that mass market adoption, even if it in the interim costs them a lot, is the right way to go. And I think all telecom operators did that way, right? So if you look at from digital inclusion and divide, the problem exists, but India in specific is far, far better than the situations you will see in Bangladesh, Pakistan, a lot of countries in Africa, even in the US, even in Europe, right? The data costs there are, quite expensive, and there are poor people there also. So these issues do exist, right? So that is, when it comes to digital inclusion and digital divide, problems are there. They will get solved across a period of time, but India is far ahead in that curve in terms of solving it, right? The fact that a banana cart owner, a guy who sells bananas on a cart at a street corner is taking digital payment is an indication of maybe how better we are in comparison to a lot of other markets, right? Hopefully everybody should get there, but I think three things. One, the digital sector and the telecom sector did a lot in this favor. And I think the government with its Digital India mission and various other initiatives like the UPI, the Unified Payment Interface, all of these infrastructural policy related aspects, which came as tailwinds to help us get over the digital inclusion and digital divide barrier, right? However, there will still remain a segment of people in the ultra poor who will still struggle with digital inclusion and digital device. That is where the institutions have to come in and help them, right? So after this piece on our situation about digital inclusion and digital divide, I'd like to come back to our educators and students, right? Now let's assume that you have a better off access to digital channels than a lot of other countries. Now comes the question of what do I as an educator need to do and what do I as a student need to change, right? The challenges I have, right? The first fundamental thing is that our educators, and when I say educators, I include teachers, academic coordinators, maybe even principals, and sometimes even the school owners. there just isn't any capacity building intervention on digital inclusion inside the institution. Everybody is figuring out on their own, or they're dependent upon what the vendor tells you to do, right? But there's nobody who says, here is how you can here is a training you could do to become a digitally literate teacher, right? Here is how you can become a digitally literate principal, right? Here is how you can become a digitally literate primary coordinator, right? So I think there is a capacity challenge there, and that capacity challenge needs to be filled by various organizations trying to build capacity building and all of that stuff. And I think this is an area I am aware that NISA has been conversing about how to fill this as well, right? On the school owner side, right, there needs to be a different kind of enablement to help them figure out how do they make technology or edtech buying decisions, how to review, how to make those decisions, right? There's that layer. That's a huge challenge, right? Then when it comes to teachers in particular, they are the users. Ultimately, the school owner and the principal may decide we will use it. But then it comes to the teachers. There again, I go back to the world of the techno-pedagogy or pediatech, whatever you want to call it, where the teachers and the primary curriculum departments have to start thinking, if I want to blend some technology with my teaching learning process, what pieces will go onto the technology, what pieces will continue in my classroom, and what is the handoff and handback between those two transactions, right? For example, can I pass on a spelling test to an app service, right? But I do teach how to write spellings, but I don't waste my time in testing and giving dictation. And that part of giving, 3 dictations a week, can that become digital? You see, so that kind of design is something which needs to be sort of built up, and that is where the educators need to focus a lot of their attention. On the student side, and when I say student, I also / parent with it, because sometimes when the child is young, it is sort of the parent who is trying to assist or take the decision for them. There, we need to really figure out things like screen time balance, how much you put on the screen, how much you create paper related work, right? So all of that kind of balance is a huge challenge which we need to do. And the answer for that challenge is how the schools and institutions create your work at home. Like this part of the work you do digitally, this part of the work you do on paper. You might take a photo and submit, but you need to do on paper. You will not do on a screen, right? So I think there are these kind of challenges which are there. And these are big challenges. These are not small challenges, because the number of teachers and students we are dealing with as a country is in the order of hundreds of millions, right? So that's how I would see it as. I mean, we can drill down on a ton of challenges, but there are these big challenges which I would like to place on the table for us to consider first.
Yes, absolutely, sir. I think one of the factors you talked about was dependency factor, the capacity factor of these schools, institutions, basically, to even conduct trainings for our teachers or even principals so that they can be digitally literate. And I actually agree with this point where you mentioned about the screen time balance. It's our biggest challenge, because when I myself was sitting for an exam, we have to write an exam on paper and click a picture and then send it to our universities. But still, I think a lot of things changed during that time, because we were mostly studying on a tablet, and learning was happening through a page or a book. So I think it's definitely a bigger challenge. And you're right, actually, in all aspects when you say that it's a responsibility on both the sides here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So, sir, so this also brings us to, so when you talked about hybrid learning or blended teaching, anything, children, they are learning from several sources these days, and their ability to connect information across multiple texts is very crucial to their understanding, and they learn from the multiple texts generally, and we all do that actually. We gather and consume information from multiple texts online. Do you think that the question of whether they are able to integrate smoothly this multiple text during reading, do you think this question is largely unexplored, and how is Worldreader addressing this?
It's a beautiful question. The moment you bring access to, the moment you make access to a large body of text which is available on the internet in different forms and shape through connected devices, affordable internet, and all that stuff, this is a natural problem to pounce on us, right? It's such a big natural problem that the amount of time to take to decide which sources I read and which sources I discard, actually that time is more than your reading time sometimes.
Definitely.
If you look at, right? And fundamentally, it is important for us to teach learners how to search for valid and authoritative sources, and then encourage them to read multiple text types always, right? Because a same topic can be dealt in 2 research projects from different dimensions, and when somebody reads them through both those documents, they will then come up with their own synthesis of what they think or feel about that topic. If you read only one research paper, then your opinion is jaded by that paper, right? That happens with textbooks also. Like, for example, if you're in North India and you look at your history book, it talks about history, and you can mistakenly assume that is a history of India. And then later on, when you travel to Bangalore 15 years later, when you're in Bangalore or Chennai for work, there you realize, oh, there's a ton of other history which I never knew, right? So that is a natural situation to happen. So multiple text sources is always important, welcome. In a typical classroom, you have very limited time to do that, and you will be very selective. But once you're able to get onto the digital learning experiences, the horizons of that open up. So it's something which we need to encourage. However, the challenge is we need to teach the learner how to assimilate multiple things. That is something we don't teach in our classrooms yet in a very good way. I think there are references of that in high school level in the national education policy right now, which never was there before, which I think is a welcome step. But we have to see what kind of pedagogic instruments are being created to be able to teach that to children in classroom, right? Moving on a little bit, you talked about how do we try and address that in Worldreader, right? For example, I'll take an example. That's the best way to do it, right? Let us say you are going through your EVS class in grade 3 and you're talking about water cycle, right? What are the texts you exchange with? You exchange with your textbook, whatever the school has given you, right? Either as a teacher, as a child, or as a parent who is trying to do something at home, you engage with the textbook, right? What we do in Worldreader is that we attach a storybook alongside with that topic, and we say, here is a collection of storybooks for grade 3, aligned to the water, concept. Here are 2 storybooks you could read, right? So those storybooks can be used as alternative text or embedded text by the teacher to increase the enthusiasm on the topic among the children by using that story in the first 5 minutes before he or she jumps into the concept, right? So convert that textbook transaction to a story trigger, excite the audience, and then start talking about the textbook material in conjunction to the story, right? And this is something which works very well because that is how our grandparents and parents taught us stuff, and that is also what the NEP is asking now to do in the foundational phase, that you storify and make things activity based, right? So the power of combining a text type text and a story type text in the primary grade classrooms is huge, and that's what we do at Worldreader.
Definitely, sir. I think we should not, let's say, underestimate the art of storytelling, because it's very powerful. Because since children, we are just like, we grew up telling stories, learning stories, and listening to them, and that's how we actually relate to them. And it's actually great that you see this multiple textual problem as a boon and not as a challenge here, because that's what we need today to be able to learn how to read multiple text. And we need teachers to even sort of inculcate this in their curriculum, which is very important, definitely. And this also brings us to the part of teacher training, because that's what Worldreader also does, and it put a lot of emphasis on this. So what part does teacher training play for Worldreader in bringing the whole array of these type of stories to your readers?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally, teacher training and teacher capacity building is the foundation of Worldreader's work. When we want children to read or parents to read at home to children, that gets triggered through teachers, right? And that gets triggered by teachers actually demonstrating that in the classroom, so that that transaction can be repeated at home, right? So for Worldreader, teacher training is very important in any program we do, not just in India, but around the world, in lots of countries we work in, right? And when it comes to teacher training, we focus on three big dimensions, right? We obviously work in the pre-primary to primary segment, and our whole ethos is about converting children to readers for life. And that means basically creating passion for reading. And the best way to do that is through storybooks, right? Now, the whole concept of how do you bring storybooks into a classroom and use them is something which is alien to a lot of teachers. So that need to be taught first, right? How do I use a story, take off my class, take off a concept, right? And then go into the content part of it, the teaching part of it, and the principles and concepts and stuff like that, right? One is that aspect of training. The second is, how do I tell a story and how do I convert that story conversation and reading conversation to reflection, right? For example, the orientation on where to pause, what kind of questions to ask in between a story or reading exercise, right? So that we assume that is something which a lot of teachers would know, but the reality, what we find is, it's not that all teachers know. They need help and support there, and a lot of teachers are actually very appreciative of that help and guidance when it comes, right? The third aspect is, how do you do the techno-pedagogy of your classroom, right? For example, when we take the water cycle, how do you plan your time? I'm going to use the Worldreader's BookSmart service for the first 5-10 minutes to excite. Then I'm going to my concept. Then I'm going to do some activities. Then I'm going to send a homework back home to the parents, asking them to go and reread the story which I read 2-3 times in this week at home using the Worldreader's BookSmart. So there's a design, right? So we also focus on that part, so that teachers are able to weave in technology tools or edtech tools into the main teaching learning process. I think one of the important things we believe is that edtech should not come and replace what's happening in the classroom. What is happening in the classroom, which is teaching learning, is the primary thing, and that should happen. Edtech services, technology services, digital services can come in only as embeds into that. Now, who is going to embed? Not somebody from outside. It is a teacher who's going to do it. So they need to be taught how to do it.
Yes, sir.
And once you teach them, and once they practice this a little while in their classrooms, they actually figure new methods. So this is not like teaching, like, here is how you do it and just do like this. So our training is more about inspiring them how they could embed. They can take some cues from the training to do it. And after a bit of time, it is actually they who come up and saying, I tried this, I tried it this way, I tried it that way, right? So we want teachers to become action researchers in the classroom, even in the techno-pedagogy experimentation, as opposed to just following a script which is given.
Yes, so I think this point you mentioned earlier also about the blended learning and teaching, that nothing should replace each other, but it could be a balanced amount of application of both of these elements. Could be physical reading and online reading, and this is how we should even bring this thing into the curriculum and teach our teachers how to make the best use of it, and so that our students are able to make it good use of it as well. So I think we should.
I would like to add one more item which we also
sure.
do in training, which is also it's actually more important than the others. This is how teachers can activate parents to read at home, right?
Okay.
Because the skill of language literacy and comprehension comes because of repeated reading and repeated discussion on what is being read, right? So that transaction in school can happen only for a limited period of time because the teachers are busy with, there might be a reading period, reading slot, but then there are a ton of other things happening. That need to be augmented by parents spending some time at home reading to the child, with the child, or along with the child, or shadowing, or just listening in when the child is doing. So we also train teachers how to train parents to do this at home. Right? And this is another thing which the NEP is also asking, like, figure out various mechanisms of involving parent in learning transactions at home. It is not to say pass on teaching to parents. Teaching continues to happen in classroom, but the repeated actions which we want the child to go through so that their learning gets reinforced, that time is available only out of school. It's really not in the school, right? So that action needs to happen outside. We make it happen through the demigod of homework, right? But homework without reflection is also of no use. We know that, right? So there needs to be some reflection companion at home. So we kind of orient teachers to do that. And we also work in communities where we know that some of our schools have parents who are not fully literate as well, right? So we also teach teachers how to help semi-literate, illiterate parents also with the child, right? For example, some of those parents are actually taught to just ask questions. You can't read, don't worry, right? Ask questions. Did you read today? What story are you supposed to read? Read this story. When the story is being read, you can ask questions. What is happening? Why is this character doing like this? So that amount of training is also, it goes a long way in helping parents. And that it also builds this very interesting trust relationship between the parent and teacher so that they are able to better help the child in the long-term basis.
Yes, so whoso is watching right now, we all know that Worldreader doesn't only have young readers, but it also has adult readers also, because even parents are involved here, which is actually the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, actually, involving parents. And because of course, I think most of the time we tend to be at home and we spend there, so it's very important that parents are also included what we're learning and stories. So I think it's a great initiative, I must say. It's very good. So sir, actually we have reached the end of our segment here, and it's time for the rapid fire question round here. So are we ready?
Anytime.
Okay, so we were just talking about the Worldreader, so we'd like to know which one is your favorite Worldreader story?
My favorite Worldreader story is a story called Red Umbrella, and it is from Tulika Publishers. It's a very endearing story of a situation where it starts raining, and then there is a red umbrella, and one animal has the red umbrella. And then as it continues to pour, another animal comes and asks, can I also be under the umbrella? Right? And the animal which is inside says, yeah, you can come in. Right? And this repeats for a little bit of time. And then there are 4 or 5 animals already under the umbrella. Right? And then the 6th one comes. And then some of them start saying, oh, we are already full, we can't allow anybody. Right? But the animal which came in most recently under the umbrella remembers that somebody allowed it to come in. So it is empathetic to the animal which is now wanting to come in, as opposed to the other animals which already came in before and forgot that value of the fact that somebody was empathetic to them. So firstly, it is an animal story. It's very colorful, illustrated well, and it has that whole visual element of endearing to children because of all the cute animals which are there. But in stealth, what it is doing is it's teaching empathy. And it is also teaching, it's easy to forget who people have been kind to you. So you have to be a little bit deliberate about being kind, right? So I love that story for those few reasons.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to learn such values from such stories. And also, we'd like to tell you that this story has been listed as our book review also in NISA Namaskar. So you have to subscribe to it and read the book review as well, because that's an amazing story, of course. So, sir, what are you reading at the moment?
Right now, I talked to you about the situation that what we are going through with screens today actually happened in the past in history when books just came in, right? So I'm actually reading this book called The Book by Keith Houston. It is a history of book itself as the most powerful object in human history, right? So this is an interesting book which talks about the history of how books came into being, all the way from the papyrus to mainstreaming. So my purpose of reading this book is to kind of reflect on what happened in the past and see, what we can learn to, make the digital versions of books as exciting as what the physical books have been.
I think I don't know if you've read this and you've reached the topic where I think they must mention this, that we had this biggest library in the Library of Alexandria in Egypt. It got bombed, right? That was very interesting, actually. So, sir, you've talked about the first, your favorite Worldreader story and what book you're reading. Now, we'd like to tell our viewers and audiences, how to develop a reading habit in the first place.
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, from my point of view, reading becomes a habit not because of reading, but because of the reflection which you do while you're reading. As a child, you might do that reflection with a parent or an adult or an elder sibling, asking questions and having conversations about it. But as you become an independent reader, you do the reflection within yourself, right? So for me, the trigger of becoming a habitual reader is in the habit of reflection. And that reinforces and increases the urge of you wanting to read more, right? Because if you want to reflect more and better, that comes because of the volume of stuff you read. So the need for reading automatically gets created when you have a habit of reflection. And I have a strange habit, actually. So I don't read one book at a time. I actually read 2 or 3 books at a time. And sometimes I pick books which are having some slightly counter points of view and kind of read them in parallel. So that's just one interesting way for me, because that significantly increases my reflection context, because I need to counterbalance the views which are there in both. And then, my cognitive adrenaline and output is far higher when I combine books as opposed to when I read single books.
I think that's an example of multiple textual reading we can see right now, and why it's important in the first place, because you need to challenge yourself, and we can't limit ourselves to just one notion, one ideology. We should read everything, actually. I think that's the very, very universal idea of education in the first place. So thank you so much for being here with us today. I think it was a very, very engaging discussion today, and I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and I hope viewers have enjoyed the discussion as well. And in the end, we can only hope for more accessible and inclusive approaches towards the path of digital literacy, as we talked about. And thank you all for watching this discussion with us. And if you have any question, please shoot your comments in the comment box in Facebook or YouTube, wherever you're watching, and we'll be happy to respond. Also, keep watching and listening to us, because we foster new communications, new conversations, and that's all which matters to us right now. Thank you so much. Thank you, Nandita,
for having me. It was a pleasure speaking to you and to your audience.